Welcome back. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. So South Africa's newly appointed special envoy to the United States, Mcebisi Jonas, has thanked the president for trusting him with an important but challenging role. The former deputy finance minister says he'll do his best to promote a healthy working relationship between Pretoria and Washington. We get reaction now from South Africa BRICS, a Business Council member, Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, joining us this evening. Dr. Nicolaou, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. What an important job that Mcebisi Jonas certainly has, and he calls it, a challenging one as well. But just initial thoughts, is he the right man for the job in your view?
Good evening to all the viewers, and thanks very much for having me, first and foremost. I think there are very few things that are as important right now in our country as resetting, recalibrating, redefining the bilateral relationship between the United States and South Africa. The US is our second largest trading partner, our third largest investment partner, and we simply cannot afford to not throw the kitchen sink at trying to reset this relationship. We know that it is highly politically strained. We know that there's a massive divergence in views right now, and I think the concept of an envoy is a good choice in terms of trying to narrow that gap, that vast gap that presently exists. Why an envoy makes sense, and I want to discuss first and foremost the concept of an envoy rather than the personality right now. I'll come on to the personality in a moment, but firstly, President Trump seems to deal with envoys. He's got his own envoys, firstly, so it seems to be something that he's well acquainted with. The second thing is the benefit of an envoy as opposed to sending an ambassador. An ambassador is a more permanent position and very difficult to withdraw if it's not working out. We've seen already what happened with Ambassador Rasool. So an envoy is not a bad concept, given that it's not a permanent position and you can withdraw an envoy as and when you need. So we kind of liked that as an idea. So that was a good development. And I think lastly, you do probably need someone right now that has both a good political and business mix. And I think you've got that in Jonas. I know that he's someone I know well personally, and I think would do a very good job. However, we know that there has been some controversy that's manifested in the last few hours. There have been some reports about things that he has or hasn't said. I guess the best thing is for Jonas to reflect on those. But I do want to say that the concept of an envoy makes a lot of sense for our country if we to recalibrate this relationship. And I also think that Jonas as an individual is a very fine individual.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate, also just that comparison, right? And speaking particularly to the choice of sending an envoy. If you will, there is, of course, the issue of what he needs to do to hit the ground running, what he needs to be prioritizing. And then there's also, how you shape the message of South Africa in Washington, top of mind, what really he should be thinking of.
Look, there's a political aspect in this, and then there's the trade and economic aspect. As business, we're of course more seized with the latter issue, but the two are completely intertwined, unfortunately. And how we manage the one will determine the outcome on the second. Regrettably, that's the way it is. We know that South Africa runs a healthy trade surplus with the United States, one of the few countries, one of the big markets, and one of the few big markets that we run a trade surplus with. So it's certainly worth, as I said, throwing the kitchen sink at trying to recalibrate this relationship. And very often economics and trade are a good anchor to resetting political relationships as well. I think there's a realization, an increasingly strong realization that AGOA in the shape and form that we know it is unlikely to be reauthorized. I don't think it's anything personal against South Africa with AGOA. I think AGOA's days are numbered for the continent. And I think we've got to get into a mindset that we're dealing with a transactional administration in the US, and we're going to have to carve out a trade deal that is beneficial to both sides. I think there are certain things that we need the US for. They're a massive market, they're a massive investor, and conversely, there are things that the US requires from us, such as critical minerals, their radioisotopes they need from us. So I'm really hoping that an envoy, whether it's one or more envoys, however many go eventually, we don't know, but that the work of an envoy is to bridge those gaps, to lay some of the technical foundations so that you can get at a political high level a closer convergence and land that trade deal, which is exactly what we need as South Africa. We need it for our economy, and we need it also in terms of how we position ourselves to investors globally.
Yeah. Dr. Nicolaou, I need to bring this in. You know, you of course made that the point earlier around an envoy versus sending an ambassador. And I go back to what happened with our former ambassador now, Ibrahim Rasool. You've got, for instance, U.S. Secretary of State using interesting words to describe him, saying that he is a race-baiting politician who hates Trump and hates America. And I bring that up because I think about, for Mcebisi Jonas in this incredibly important role, there are, of course, the areas that he needs to be avoiding. So if you were to think of a few don'ts, what would those be?
Look, I think, you know, the administration is like anything else you deal with in business. I mean, you're going to target and customize your message to meet the audience that to meet the expectation of the audience that you're dealing with. So those things that are red flags need to be avoided. You've mentioned some of them. My suggestion is in a very complex environment, and Jonas is a very skilled individual. He's a skilled politician. He's done his stint in business. He's chaired listed companies. So I think he's very well rounded. My advice would be put down any megaphones, focus on where the commonalities exist, and there are some commonalities, as much as it seems that's not the case right now, because we just seem so far apart politically between Pretoria and Washington, D.C. I would focus on those areas where there is commonality. I would do a lot of clarifying. I think there's a lot of misconception out there, and I would certainly look at anchoring things in trade. Trade is what makes the world go round. Economics are what makes the world go round, and that's where I would place focus if I were to give Jonas any advice.
Yeah, I was going to let you go, but you've piqued my interest there when you talked about commonality. Perhaps one or two examples of those commonalities between Washington and Pretoria?
Look, it's definitely not in basketball or baseball, I can assure you. There are, as I indicated earlier, the fact that there's a healthy trade between our two countries, albeit that we have benefited more in the relationship because we run a trade surplus, and that in itself needs some internal reflection in South Africa, because there are many countries that we seem to be closely aligned to where we're running trade deficits. So I think we need a whole review of our trade patterns as a country anyway. But despite that, the fact that there is a healthy trade between our two countries, the fact that we run a trade surplus, the fact that there are 601 American companies invested in South Africa, employing tens of thousands of people, there are South African companies that are invested and have operations in the United States. That alone should be telling us that we have, certainly in business, commerce, and economics, we already have some commonality. we just need to bring out those commonalities more forcibly. We need to put the megaphones down, and we need to first stay focused on what pulls us or draws us together rather than what pulls us apart here.
All right. Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much for having me.
No, we really appreciate it. He, of course, is with the SA BRICS Business Council, responding there to the president really appointing Mcebisi Jonas there as the special envoy to the United States. He, of course, being the former Deputy Finance Minister.